أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah to send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated, and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah, we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, we're here to continue our conversation on the vision of a virtuous community. Some of the questions that we're going to dive right into this evening are regarding the institutions that were established by the household of our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, and these institutions that were set up in order to protect and safeguard the religious teachings of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. You see, with Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, their vision was not merely to hand down the religion to individuals in their own personal capacity, but rather through the collective of individuals that would form organizations and institutions, one that would have systems and processes that would be self-correcting in some sorts as well. These institutions and these organizations would be fundamental in protecting, preserving, and safeguarding the religious teachings of the Prophet and his household. We're going to be covering these three institutions, being the Islamic Seminary, Al-Hawza al-Ilmiya, the mosque, and what would also be Al-Husayniyas that would develop from the mosques or the centers, and then the system of Marja'iyya and Taqleed, and then finally, out of the system of Marja'iyya, the concept of Khums. So the questions we're going to be asking are: one, what is the Hawza and how did it begin? Secondly, what is the historical significance of the mosques and the Husayniyas? Thirdly, what are the substantive requirements of the Marja'iyya? How does the system of Marja'iyya work? And how does taqleed take place from the mukallaf, as in the individual who is of age? What is their option when it comes to taqleed, and how do they go about doing that? And then finally, what is the social and political importance of khums? Not just merely it being as an obligation religiously, but what kind of dimension does it add for the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, socially and politically? So we're going to jump right into the first question when it comes to the Hawza. Al-Hawza al-Ilmiya, as we touched upon in the previous nights, especially last night, we touched upon this briefly. When it came to the establishment of the Hawza, the religious education from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, the Imams actually started the Hawza. And this started way back with the time of, especially at the time of Imam al-Baqir and Imam Jafar al-Sadiq alayhi salam. These sessions of teaching individuals about their faith, about the Holy Quran, about the verses and the Word of God, in connecting people through the religious obligation, started way back from the time of the Holy Prophet and then continued. But especially in the nature of the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, that really took place during the time of Imam al-Baqir and more so during the time of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. The University of Ahlul Bayt, or the Islamic seminary that was established in the city of Kufa, would be one that would attract over 4,000 students to come and study in the seminary of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. And they were not all individuals that were considered to be adherents of the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt, whether it be theologically or jurisprudentially. These were individuals from across the nation that were coming to learn from the Imam. So much so that even the scholars of that time would be taught at the hands of the Imam. And what I mean by scholars at that time being people that, again, were not adherents to what was considered to be a minority group, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, as-Shia. The significance here when it came to the Hawza was that it was a safe haven for anybody that wanted to come and learn the religious teachings. Across the board, people that would come from different backgrounds, no matter where they were from, no matter their level of expertise or knowledge, it was open for them. This openness of the Academy of Ahlul Bayt or the Islamic seminary itself would be something that would remain characteristic, that would be a main characteristic of the Hawza, of the seminary, for 1,000 years and on. You see, with the establishment of the Hawza, which, like we mentioned, would start, of course, with the Prophet and his family in the city of Medina, and then depending on the member of Ahlul Bayt that was the Imam of the time. For example, the Imam Zain al-Abidin spent most of his time in the city of Medina, the city of the Prophet. Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq would go on to spend more time in Kufa with the seminary. And then each one of the Imams, depending on their circumstances, some would end up going to Tus, for example, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. Then some would end up going to Samarra, Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari alayhim salam. And the Hawza, which really refers to a gathering or group of people coming together and learning, not necessarily an institution that is built with walls and concrete and cement and bricks. It's not necessarily a college or university that we would refer to when we're comparing academic institutions, right? When you look at Harvard in Boston, Massachusetts, or you're looking at Oxford University or Cambridge, you see a building, and the affiliation to that university or the academic institution is one that's often associated with the building itself. With the Hawza, it wasn't necessarily that. In fact, the relationship that was most significant was that mentor-mentee relationship established in the Hawza. From the early days of the Imam, it was the Imam and their students, whether they were meeting in the Prophet's mosque in the city of Medina, or in Masjid Kufa in the city of Kufa, or in the home of the Imam, or in the home of his companions. The relationship between the mentor as the Imam, or what would later be the companions of the Imams, or what would later be the scholars that were protecting and safeguarding the heritage that they have learned from the Imams, that relationship with the scholar and the mentee as the student of the Islamic knowledge, of the Islamic learning, the whole establishment was centered around that. So there wasn't necessarily what we would consider to be, when we were applying to academic institutions. For example, when I was applying for undergrad, there was an application process that I went to through the end of high school. And then when I wanted to apply to law school, there was also an application process there. There was standardized testing, there was an exam, et cetera, et cetera. Traditionally, in the Hawza system, in the Islamic seminary, there wasn't that. It was more of an open platform. If you wanted to come and study, you could do so. But the evaluation would be based on that relationship, that mentor-mentee. How is the student doing by the assessment of their teacher? The mastery of knowledge itself wouldn't be through standardized testing, but rather it would be through the evaluation of the scholar, of the teacher, and their peers. And that level of teacher and peers would continue to be throughout. You're not always necessarily one who is merely a student. At certain times, you'd be teaching other people. And the same, like, you're not always in the position of a scholar or a teacher, but you're also as a student. Usually, some of the top tier of the scholars in the Hawza, the professors in the Hawza, would also still be learning and be students of the grand scholars or the Maraja, which we're going to be talking about, inshallah, in a few moments. So the whole system of the Hawza was built in a way where it was an open society, an open platform for people to come in to learn and to seek knowledge. But at the same time, there were safety mechanisms were there, established throughout, so that if you wanted to gain the knowledge, you would. And if you wanted to apply yourself and be scholarly, it would take many, many years of dedication for you to get there. The significance here is that there wasn't necessarily one way for you to actually get into the Hawza. And what I mean by that is, you didn't necessarily have to come from a certain background. ethnically or racially. You didn't have to come from a certain family. You didn't have to come from a certain connection of sorts, but rather it was your merit that would allow you to apply yourself and reach the goals that you wanted to reach. And the goals that you wanted to reach were applied by you. So when it came to the actual studies, just as some practical examples from people that have studied in the Hawza and people that are in this on a day-to-day, you would attend a class as a seminary student. And seminary students go in and they attend a class. Nowadays, whether it be in studying in the Hawza of Qom or the Hawza of Najaf, some have built institutions, some have buildings where the students come together and they have classes of sorts with their teachers. Traditionally, it would either take place in the mosque. For example, in the city of Najaf, you have so many different mosques that surround the shrine of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and also on the outskirts of the city, like the mosque of Sheikh Tusi and others, where they would go and they would have their sessions there and sit with the scholars, listen to the lectures, and then get into these debates or questions and answer sessions with their teachers throughout the sessions. Then what's also significant is the sessions that would be al-mubahathat or al-mubahatha, that would be a session of engagement between students and their peers that are taking the same subject matter. So they would force each other in a way to teach the classes to each other to show mastery of knowledge. So when it came to your ability to master the knowledge or not, there was that relationship with the teacher, there was the relationship with the scholar, there was a relationship with your peers and administering to each other. This is what the course is telling us. This is what the author of the book is speaking about. These are the principles that are being understood here. And then they would challenge one another. That was also combined with, or is traditionally combined with, the notes of the students on the lectures of their teachers that are compiled often as commentary. And if the teacher is teaching from a particular book, sometimes those commentaries, if they're significant enough or done in such a way, some of those commentaries as muqarrarat, as referred to in the Arabic language, would be taken and then published later on. The system of the Hawza is so beautiful, and especially when you see it firsthand. As a visitor of the holy city of Najaf, I've had the ability to go and see some of the classes that the students were having, and of varying levels, whether it be introductory classes or intermediate classes or even Bahth Kharij classes. Just going in there and just observing with myself and some of the other students and professionals that have gone on some of these visits and retreats that we've had. For example, with the Mainstay Foundation, it's coordinated over the past few years something called the Najaf Retreat, and that gave the ability to students and professionals from the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom to go and see firsthand how does the Hawza work, how do the students engage with the scholars, to allow them as young professionals coming from overseas to experience dialogue and engagement with the scholars firsthand, whether it be the students of the Hawza, the teachers and professors of the Hawza, or even the visitation of the Maraja themselves, and being able to benefit from their wisdom and their guidance. Now, moving from the institution of the Hawza itself, like we mentioned, this was one of the foremost institutions in producing individuals that would continue to safeguard and protect the faith. The Imams believed so much in education, and that was why there was a continuous emphasis from Imam to Imam on the establishment of this institution of the Hawza, in it being one that disseminates knowledge and teaches people and gives people the ability to learn about their faith and then go on and teach other people as well, so that people can have this ability to understand what is their obligation before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the second area, which is also to a certain extent connected to the Hawza, but more on a social and spiritual level, is the institution of the mosque. Now, mosques from the very beginning of Islam were extremely significant. For one, they were the establishments where people would go and they would pray. The mosque itself is being the house of God, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People would go there as a sanctuary. People would go there to be able to connect themselves to the Creator and then also connect themselves to the rest of their community. With the mosques, you have mosques that started from the very beginning with the Holy Prophet in Masjid Quba and then the Masjid al-Nabi in the city of Medina. And then other masajid, other mosques would be built like Masjid Ali, Masjid Fatima, Masjid Salman al-Farisi, amongst others. These places were first and foremost places to worship, places to be a sanctuary for people to turn themselves to God. But at the same time, they also brought people together, not just in prayer and congregation, but for celebrations, for commemorations, for funerals that would take place when people would have a tragedy in their family. They would bring them to the mosque, they would pray upon them. The functions of the community, of the Muslim community, centered around the mosque. In their happiness, in their joy, and in their sadness, and their sorrow, the mosque was a center point for people to come together. And during the history that would develop for the followers of Ahlul Bayt, especially experiencing different ruling authorities that would treat them heavy-handedly. With the Umayyads, the Shia, for example, experienced a time where they went from the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala to the quelling of the revolts that would take place during the lifetime of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam by different factions in the Ummah. And then those would continue into the life of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. But you would find that the life of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, you would have the transition between the Umayyads to the Abbasids. Not that this was a peaceful, handover of power. To the contrary, it was brutal, it was vicious, it was bloody. But there was a war between these two groups to see who was going to stay in power. Because of the focus of these ruling authorities and these political parties were at each other on that level, it allowed for a space for the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, particularly the Imams, to educate and teach their followers. So that's why you will find during the lifetime of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he had many, many thousands of students and people that were learning from him and benefiting from him directly. But then, for example, with his son, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, and with the rise of the Abbasids, that was suddenly changed. And for the vast majority or a very good portion of the life of Imam al-Kadhim, he was imprisoned. This is the Imam that is known for being one who, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him with the situation, and he went through this trial, went through this tribulation, he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as soon as he was in prison, and he said, "Oh Allah, I asked you to give me more time to have with you and move away from the distractions of the world, and you gave that to me, so thank you." This is the Imam who experienced this, but at the same time as the Abbasids, though the Imams were able to transition and adapt to any circumstance, there were certain practical ramifications of that. And some of those included, whether it be during the lifetimes of the Imams from Imam al-Kadhim and on, and even afterwards into the occultation of Imam al-Mahdi, was that the Shia were marginalized in those communities during some of these times where if they wanted to establish mosques and they wanted to build mosques, which we know in our faith tradition, in our doctrine in Islam, one of the most rewarding deeds is for one to establish a mosque, is for one to build a mosque so people can pray in. Imagine the ongoing reward that you're getting even after your life when people that are walking into this mosque, this house of God, this masjid, and they're praying, and you're the one who allowed that. You're the one who made that happen for them by building this mosque or contributing to it to make it happen. During certain periods of time in history, particularly during the Abbasid time, and then into the reign of the Ottomans that would continue after the Abbasid Empire, from the 15th century onward until the beginning of the 20th century, you had administrations that prohibited Shia or followers of Ahlul Bayt from building mosques. So then came this new establishment that would be Al-Husayniyah. So many of our Islamic centers and our institutions are referred to as Husayniyas even today. And the historical heritage that this comes from is the fact that we were not able to build mosques during certain times. However, that didn't necessarily prohibit us from building other institutions. Now, why the significance here with regards to not building mosques? Well, some of the ruling authorities and some of the regimes, their administrations wanted this particular group of people who they were not necessarily fond of, usually because they were threatened by their leaders and their movement during their lifetimes, for example, with the imams, though they themselves did not cause any pressure or of any threat, or did not they themselves threaten the establishment still felt threatened by them by mere virtue of people gravitating towards them. Even at the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, though he did not go out and threaten anybody around him, there are certain people that still felt threatened by him. Case in point, the people of Quraysh, the pagans of Quraysh, the chieftains of Quraysh, they didn't want anything to do with him. They didn't want him to be in their society doing what he was doing, preaching what he preached, because they felt threatened by his principles that he was bringing forward that was going to change their way of life, their economics, their politics, and their social structure. So the authorities during the Abbasids and the Ottomans, by prohibiting the followers of Ahlul Bayt from being able to establish mosques, what they did was they wanted to make Shia, make followers of Ahlul Bayt in the greater society look like the individuals that weren't necessarily practicing or religious. Why? Because they don't even have mosques. They don't even go to mosques. They don't have their own places of worship. So this prohibition would backfire in a sense. Why? Because they were still able to form places of worship and places of gathering for religious purposes through the establishment of the Husayniyas. And a lot of this, though, that it would come out practically that they would be able to do this, but for a long time, some of these establishments would be veiled in a sense to be more so cultural centers, or more so being places that were not religious centers, not places of worship, so that they would veil and guard themselves from the heavy hands of the authorities of the time, so they don't catch wind of it and then close those places down. So a lot of the gatherings, whether it be particularly the celebrations for the Mawalid of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, or even more particularly to the majalis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam during Muharram and Safar and other parts of the year, these a lot of times were held in secret. And they safeguarded the principles and the heritage of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and the followers of Ahlul Bayt were able to continue to mourn and celebrate and hold on to these rituals and these practices, but they were done a lot of times, again, not in the public eye. And we owe it to these individuals, from the imams themselves onto their followers and their companions of their time and onward, for making these sacrifices where we still hold on to our faith, we still hold on to our religion because of these individuals and the sacrifices that they made a commitment that even if they had to do things in secret, and even if they had to lay low, and even if they had to stay under the radar, they did so, and they preserved our faith and preserved our principles, and telling us the narrative of how did we get to where we got here today. We owe it to these individuals, we owe it to these groups, these scholars and the companions of the imams who gave us so much in the establishment of these institutions. Many of our Islamic centers today that we belong to may not necessarily be formally a masjid or a mosque, but they're an Islamic center, a community center, a Husayniyah, and we owe it to ourselves and to these individuals before us, our fathers, our forefathers, or maybe even if we don't have any blood affiliation with them, no worries, we have a spiritual affiliation with them, that we stay connected with these places of worship, these places of bringing the community together. The community centers are extremely important. And for all of the young men and women that are listening on today, you have a role to play. You have a place in these Islamic centers, in these community centers. And though at times there are challenges definitely with any organization and any institution, any establishment, that's just the nature of the way organizations work. The key is for us to keep the big picture in mind. The key is for us to really think about what is my contribution here? If there are certain things that I don't like that are happening, how can I better it? How can I add in a positive way? If I want to see certain things happen in my community, I want certain programs that are targeted to certain age groups, whether it be really young kids that are not being tended to, or there's no programs for them, or there's no attention given to them. Let me take the initiative to make it happen. Let me open my hand to put it with other people that are like-minded and want to see this happen. I want to see more programs or more circles that are grown around the youth, high school students, college students, university students, young professionals. Cater to those groups, make things happen. Our role in our community, if we look at the heritage of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and we look at their movement throughout history, they were doers. They were people who got things done. And they got things done often quietly. And what I mean by that is they didn't necessarily go up and make a big fuss about what they were doing. They didn't go out and tell people, make a huge announcement and make sure that people heard them loud and clear. This is what we're trying to do on a megaphone. But instead, what they did was they acted. They did what they needed to do to make sure that the religion was preserved, that the families were taken care of, that the youth, the elderly people were taken care of. They were educated, they were learned, and those learned individuals would go on to continue to pass on the message and educate other people. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam had that very calm, strong presence when it came to their companions and their followers, that their followers knew what their obligation was before them, and they empowered them. So when you look at your religious establishments and the centers in your community, look at these places as places that if you see good things, then support it and continue to strengthen those good things that exist. And if you see things that need to change or need to be addressed, and certain groups that need to be catered to more, then be that catalyst to move that forward and make it happen for yourself. These institutions, these places, these centers, these mosques are ours in the sense of spiritual guardianship over our community and the principles that we're supposed to dedicate ourselves to preserve in honor of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, as in paying that homage to them for all of the sacrifices that they made. Look at the tragedy of Karbala and look at the tragedy of all of the imams that they experienced. You and I, we connect to them and we have the affinity towards them. In connecting to them and ultimately connecting to our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the sacrifices that he made as the mercy to mankind. Being a mercy to mankind was not easy. Being a beacon of light to everybody, friend and foe alike, was not easy. You and I, brothers and sisters, if we don't have challenges today, we're not going to grow an affinity with Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Know that the closer we are to Ahlul Bayt, the more we're able to look at our problems, look at our challenges, and embrace them within the community and outside of the community. Inshallah, we're going to be in the next coming nights talking a little bit more about what does it mean for you and I to actually have a community. Beyond the idea of a virtuous community, what is the significance of community itself? And with a strong community within, how does that translate into engaging with people that may not necessarily be considered as a part of your community in that specific internal sense? Now, beyond the mosque and the Husayniyah and the historical significance of that and how that translates to you and I today, and making sure that we honor these centers and we spend time and dedicate to not only going and praying in them, but also making sure that if there's help that's needed towards them, whether it be financial support, it be spending time, it be bringing human resources in, your family, your friends, encouraging people to volunteer there, and in many other things, you have the establishment or the institution of marja'iyya. Now, marja'iyya itself is not a institution in the sense of it's a council of scholars and they come and meet in a building, similar to what we said about the Islamic seminary. The marja'iyya itself is one that comes as an extension of the imams in trying to deduce and understand what is my religious obligation before God. That sense of going to the maraja and tarja ilayhim, meaning I'm going back to them. These individuals, these scholars, they have certain substantive requirements that we look at to understand, well, who do I go to begin with? Is it just anybody that I go to? Someone that I deem myself to be worthy, or someone I deem myself to be knowledgeable? Like, okay, I listen to this scholar and he has a lot of wisdom. I love the way he speaks. I love the way he addresses issues. And I don't have access right now to my imam because we're in the state of occultation and I'm not in a position to connect directly with the imam. So I'm gonna talk to this scholar that I believe is knowledgeable, is wise, is solid, and I can get my religion from. And I can get my, essentially, my faith, my religious duties from. It's important for us to know when it comes to the system of marja'iyya and taqleed, right? The taqleed is the emulation, the following of the marja, the following of the scholar, the marja being the person you're going back to. When it comes to this individual, there's two substantive requirements that are had in order for someone to be a marja. The first is that this individual is a mujtahid, that they have gotten to a level of ijtihad, which means they are independently able to deduce the religious ruling based on the Quran and the Sunnah or the Hadith by themselves, without necessarily referring to another scholar and emulating another scholar. They independently can deduce the religious ruling, and thus they don't need to follow someone else. This is a mujtahid. A mujtahid not necessarily is a marja. A marja ends up being an individual who is someone that's followed. I can be a mujtahid without necessarily being a marja. However, ijtihad, or being a mujtahid, is a substantive requirement of a marja. The second being adil, being just. Now, being just is, in a technical sense, religiously from Islamic law, in this context, we're looking at this is an individual who does not publicly sin. This is an individual who follows all of his obligations. This is someone who people know him to be upright, to have great integrity. This is a person who people will pray behind, right? That also being another requirement of the imam, or the person who is the leader of prayer. Now, when it comes to the marja, there can be a lengthy discussion when it comes to multiple maraja and who to follow, but the very basics of it, and inshallah, one can go to their respected scholar, or if you're not following somebody or you don't know who to follow, it would be very beneficial to go to somebody that is a teacher in the hawza, a teacher in the seminary, or at least a student in the seminary, somebody that you can trust to engage in this conversation, to learn more about it. Another great resource I would recommend is, other than, of course, engaging these conversations with the scholars themselves, but also doing yourself some reading. A book that I recommend is this book called Marja'iyya, A Candid Conversation, which was abridged and adapted from the original work of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim from his book, Al-Marja'iyya wa Qadaya Ukhra. This book is an actual conversation with this grand scholar in trying to understand how does Marja'iyya work. And this book, in English, in understandable language, a conversation of sorts with the scholar, very beneficial read that I believe you'll gain some insight in that, to understanding directly from a marja, what does marja'iyya look like? And what's beautiful about the conversation with him is he's often referring to scholars of the past, and of course contemporary scholars of his time when he was studying and when he was actually getting on the path of ijtihad himself. He refers often to Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim. He doesn't refer much to himself, just showing the humility and the humbleness of a lot of our scholars in the way they engage in these conversations, though they are authorities in their own right. Now, What's so important about us understanding with marja'iyya and with taqleed specifically as an institution, we have a religious obligation the before the imam and ultimately before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In our usul al-din, the principles of a religion, we're responsible to deduce that and understand that on our own. When it comes to our furu' al-din, our practices, our prayer, our fasting, our hajj, our zakat, all of these things, for example, when you go to hajj especially, there are so many nuances, so many detailed rulings that you need to know and understand. Otherwise, you're going to be in some deep trouble of not knowing what to do when you get there for the rituals. Our religious duty is to either become a scholar, a mushtahid ourselves, so that we can deduce the religious ruling, which is often very hard and not necessarily practical, especially if you're not one who is in the hawza. Secondly, or your other option in that, to make sure that you're fulfilling your duty before God so that you're mubrid al-dhimma, that you have a clear conscience before God, is that you do ihtiyat in everything, so that you take the precautionary route in every single thing that you do. For example, you don't know if you're a frequent traveler or not, that you travel a lot or not. Some scholars say if you're a frequent traveler, that you don't pray qasr anymore, that you pray tamam, you pray full on all of your prayers. So if you're you're taking the precautionary route, you would pray both the tamam and you'd pray qasr. So you'd have this precautionary route in addition to what you would be your normal obligation. Then the third route is taqleed. You go to the most knowledgeable scholar of the time, the one who is considered to be a marja, and you refer to them and you follow them in what they deduce to be the religious rulings. Now that is just a brief overview on that institution of marja'iyya and taqleed, and how this, in addition to the mosques, in addition to the Husayniyat, in addition to the Islamic seminary as an establishment, all contribute to, as institutions, protecting and safeguarding the religious teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. All of these institutions do a wonder of work. And it's important to want to stay connected to them because of their dedication to the heritage and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Finally, when it comes to khums, this idea, without going into the religious laws, the Islamic laws on the details of khums, of course, is established in the Holy Quran as one of the type of alms. If you go to chapter 8, verse 41 of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the obligation of giving our khums, and that is something that is given to Allah, to the Prophet, etc., as a religious obligation on our end. Again, one of the forms of alms that are given in addition to zakat and the different types of zakat. With khums, I wanted to just mention this, and we'll finish here, is the social and political significance of the institution of khums is that throughout history, it allowed the marja'iyya, it allowed the Islamic seminary, al-Hawza al-Almiyya, and it allowed the community centers and the Islamic centers that were established for the followers of Ahlul Bayt when other religious institutions did not allow the followers of Ahlul Bayt to enter and did not allow them to be considered to be part of their community, depending on the ruling authorities and the regimes and the administrations of that time that minority Shia Muslims were living under. It allowed for the Shia community to be autonomous and independent from those authorities. And what do I mean by that? The marja'iyya would not be compromised. Why? Because it had its own self-sustaining model. The self-sustaining model was established through the institution of khums. Khums, of course, has two arms, Sahm al-Imam and Sahm al-Sada. Sahm al-Sada, the part of the Sada, is given to poor Sayyids, because poor Sayyids, this is particularly their only way religiously that they could accept certain dues, as charity is not necessarily go to Sayyids. Sadaqah is prohibited upon them. So this part goes to poor Sayyids. The second part is Sahm al-Imam, which is used and administered by the marja'iyya, by the marja that you're giving your khums to, for these religious projects that safeguard the institution of Shi'ism, that safeguard the religious group, the Islamic seminary, the mosques, the centers, the charity projects, the community work that's done, whether no matter what part of the world it's in, these are administered by the marja, and the power of this tool itself allows this establishment, the leaders of the faith, during the time of occultation, to keep themselves at a distance from authorities that may try to influence them. For the longest time, and this is by the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, during the time of the occultation, the religious establishment within Tashayyu has been autonomous and independent from any other institution, government or otherwise. And a lot of that is thanks to the institution of Khums and our ability and our obligation as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam to pay the alms to self-sustain our school of thought. Brothers and sisters, we've covered these 4 areas, these 4 institutions that are so integral for us in making sure that the preservation of our teachings as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam are there. The Hawza, Al-Hawza Al-Almiyya, the Islamic Seminary, the mosque, the Husayniyat, the Marja'iyya itself as an establishment, and knowing our obligation of taqleed is an understanding and deducing our responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and clearing our conscience in that. And finally, the institution of Khums that allows us that social and political edge in being autonomous and independent from governments or any other authorities or oppressive regimes or groups that would try to influence the teachings of Ahlul Bayt and their followers. وأن with that, هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على نبينا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.